Today I'm going to show you how to make a really nice Shou style bowl. I cut the piece of oak into the right dimensions before gluing the two parts together, adding 4 F-clamps and leaving to dry. I then cut a sacrificial piece of wood, which I would screw the faceplate to. I cut a spare as well for another project, which you'll see later on this week. I then glued that sacrificial piece of oak onto the blank. I used my 350mm handsaw to cut through the oak, although I found it quite difficult to cut. I also marked the centre point of the blank so that I could glue the faceplate very accurately to the middle and also make it easy to use my calipers to make sure I cut off the corners correctly. Off camera I cut the corners of the bowl to leave me with an octagonal blank, which is far better to turn than using a square blank as there is more surface contact between the blank and the tool. I then started to turn the bolt around. As always, I used my round scraper, which is definitely my favourite tool to use, and the one I'm most comfortable with. It is extremely versatile due to it being able to be used to shape the profile of the bowl, hollow out the inside material, and flatten the bowl. It is also fairly easy to sharpen when you compare it to something like a roughing gouge or a parting tool. I sanded the bowl to 180 grit to remove any slight tool marks, and then sanded to 400 grit to make it very smooth. This bowl is my own take on a traditional Shou finish. Shou began in Japan in the 18th century, but was used to weatherproof wood, rather than used to create art as it is today. Traditional Shou is done using cedar, due to it being very porous, lending it to work extremely well when charring the surface. All I did was apply some water to the outside of the bowl and char it using a small blowtorch. After this, I remounted the bowl onto the lathe after it had cooled down. I sanded it with 180 grit and 400 grit to remove any rough bits left by the blowtorch. I then applied some Libron yellow wood dye to give a modern and contemporary look to the oak bowl. I used a heat gun here to help speed up the drying time for the dye to soak into the wood. Following that, I buffed the dye into the bowl using a clean piece of kitchen roll, and then afterwards added some of my homemade cinnamon red wax finish, which gave a nice smell to the bowl and gave it a subtle red undertone which contrasts to the dark char of the bowl. Although I forgot to film that stage, all of my bowl videos cover applying some form of wax or oil. I then hollowed out the bowl. I used my round scraper made by Faithful. This round scraper is incredibly well engineered and in my opinion is rather affordable at around £16, especially given how versatile of a tool it is. In my opinion, this tool can do almost everything, and if I could only have one tool, it would be a round scraper. One thing that would help when making these bowls is to use a curved tool rest, so there is not as much distance from the tool to the section I'm hollowing. Using a curved tool rest would also help eliminate much of the chatter that can be experienced when turning bowls. Initially shaping the outside of the profile of the bowl, I found it quite difficult to turn the oak as it gave quite sharp shavings, but when I was turning the inside of the bowl it was a completely different story. It turned really well and left very little tool marks. So, to remove any tool marks that were left, I just used 180 grit sandpaper, followed by a bit of 400 grit, which left a nice finish for applying the food safe oil to. I wanted to experiment with doing very thin walls on this bowl, so as you can see I went very thin, but just thin enough that it wouldn't go through the side of the bowl. I also kept checking the depth using my ruler, which was placed against the bowl's surface, and a steel rule which placed all the way to the back of the bowl. This ensured I didn't go through the bottom of the bowl. I then took the bowl off the lathe and cut it free from the faceplate using my tenon saw. Apologies for the bad lighting here, but it was rather late when I was making this, and I was having to use my lights rather than use natural light as I usually do. I applied some food safe finish to the bottom of the bowl, and that was it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing.